Well, as we take a look at the weather forecast here, now that we are officially into the final month of the year, December is here. We're joined here to talk about what's happening not only in the U.S., but in South America as well, keeping an eye on Brazil and Argentina. Eric Snodgrass, Principal Atmospheric Scientist with Nutrient Ag Solutions, joins us here once again this week to talk about the weather. Eric, great to have you on the program with us again this week. And I'll start in the U.S. Couple things for us to talk about here. I know temperatures over the weekend fairly mild for this time of year. I would say in many areas, not a lot of precipitation. It seemed like a pretty calm start to the month of December in the U.S. Eric.
Yeah, it did. And if you like warm temperatures, just wait till middle of the week. We're going to see temperatures throughout the plains and Midwest maybe climb 25 to 30 degrees above average. I mean, there's some really, really warm conditions coming in. Now, today ahead of it, it's going to be extremely windy in the plains. We're talking about 40 to 50-mile-an-hour gusts from Montana all the way down through Colorado, then getting out there into the open plains. But it's just going to be the very warm air that follows it. And unfortunately, with that warmer air, I've not seen a whole lot of precip coming with it. There's a little clipper that's sneaking through the Midwest, but it's not a big precipitation kind of creator. So yeah, we're going to go to this first week of December relatively mild for a big section of the country.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of folks are liking. Let's talk long range forecast, though. I know some new data out for the month of December. Maybe we can dive into that a little bit. What are you seeing with some of that new long range data, Eric?
Yeah, so the Climate Prediction Center at the end of every month on the last day, they always update their new 1 month outlook. So they did this on the 30th. We're now seeing the month of December. And they painted a picture where much of the eastern half of the country is going to be mild for most of the month. And we're certainly going to start that way. We do not have a connection to cold air just yet. And what I mean by that is there's no big ridge in Alaska. There's no big ridge in Greenland. And without those two things on either side of us, we can't get the cold air to dive down. So, sure, I buy that. The precipitation pattern is going to be a mess, though, and we need the moisture. In fact, just last night I was in Memphis, and my son and I stopped at the Bass Pro Shop to get a good look at the Mississippi River, which is still about 6.5 feet below low stage. And yeah, it was impressive to see how low it is. But honestly, we need a mild start to this winter with a whole lot of flow out of the southwest. In other words, big systems that roll from California to Maine. We're going to try to get some of that later this week. There is a system, I'm talking late this week, that may come out of the plains and be maybe a big snowmaker for parts of the Midwest, definitely bringing in some severe weather threats south and some stronger, storms and heavier rain. But the details haven't been ironed out. This is all the way, I'm talking
Mhm.
about the Friday and Saturday of this week. I'll watch that, but then what I don't like is what happens after it. It goes right back to where the flow comes out of the Northwest. And
Mhm.
so what's the problem? When is it going to finally just turn around and give us a full blown El Nino look to this pattern? And what I mean by that is the subtropical jets showing up that flow from the southwest. So I guess the way I would kind of put a stamp on the new winter forecasts are going to be it's going to be a back half loaded winter. You're going to have to wait until we get past the peak of this El Nino, which is still probably, I don't know, I'd call it another 40 days away. And then I think there's going to be a lot of action in late January, well, most of January, and then getting into February, March. So I hope it's a nasty winter, Jesse, to be honest with you,
Mhm.
because nasty winters correct soil moisture problems. So we need to get that in here to get that Mississippi River back up.
And to your point about the El Nino, this has kind of been an atypical type of El Nino here this year, hasn't it, Eric?
Well, it's been slow to develop. It has not, it's about half the strength that it was forecast to be. And what's atypical about it is that we've got some spots of cooler water in the North Pacific. Normally, there's a complement to El Nino of warm water hugging the west coast of North America. And this year, we don't have that. We've got what we call the negative phase of the PDO. That's some cool water in the Gulf of Alaska. And we also have the negative phase of the PMM. That's where there's cold water that stretches from the Baja toward Hawaii. Normally, if this El Nino was going to just grab the pattern and never let go, all that water would be warm. So that's why I put big question marks on the long range. I don't think anybody's going to be able to nail down this winter because of that inconsistency in this El Nino behaving exactly like historic El Ninos do.
All right, let's move our attention to South America, get an update on Brazil and Argentina. I know this forecast down there, there's been kind of some back and forth. You and I talked about this last week between the Euro and the GFS in Brazil. Looked like some rains in central Brazil here the last few days, kind of verified. I guess get me up to speed. What are you seeing down there right now?
Well, up to speed is a bit confusing because I spent this morning looking at the latest NDVI data. So that's a satellite technique we use to measure vegetation health. And I don't, some places that you'd say saw some tremendous heat stress and drought stress, they're showing up with better NDVI values than a year ago. And you're like, okay, well, how is that possible? And then you see down farther south, like Paraná, the Rio Grande do Sul, some very high values, but that makes sense. It's been flooding down there. So
Mhm.
the forecast, at least the models agree, both the GFS and the European model both agree that southern Brazil is going to stay wet and there's better rains for Argentina. What they don't agree is central and northern Brazil. The European model wants next week to be the week that all of a sudden turns the pattern around for much of north central Brazil. So Mato Grosso, part of Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Tocantins, these areas. And if the European model verifies, we'll be off to the races with discussions about much better looking crops and yield.
Mhm.
GFS says no way. I mean, it just keeps it all dry. And I've been asked for last week, well, which model do you trust? Which one do you? And I jokingly say I don't trust either of them, but that's kind of the reality. And one's been too wet and the other's been too dry. So it's somewhere in between that the reality exists. And the question is, we need to get some conversations going with some Brazilian growers that'll kind of give it to us straight and tell us what things look like. Because as I look at them from space, or if I look at them in the forecast models, the picture's a bit inconsistent there. I can tell you this, since you got me down there, the Panama Canal is still dry. I at least know
Mhm.
that. I know the forecast for that area stays dry, but I don't know a whole lot else about maybe the full-on situation in Brazil, given some of the inconsistencies in the forecast data.
Yeah, so kind of some question marks, and I would agree with you. Maybe we just need to get some Brazilian growers on tap here to talk about it. What about Argentina? It seems like things have kind of been the same in Argentina too, but things have improved considering the just the terrible drought that they had the last few years, Eric.
Yeah, and that still shows up in the stats. So when we look down there and look for spring rains, in fact, I was just looking this morning at a place called Cordoba. Many of your listeners probably know exactly where that is, but if you don't, Cordoba is just right smack dab in the middle of their main ag area. It looks just like Illinois if you were to see a picture of it. And I was looking down there, and they've had three events, three rainfall events, not a whole lot of rain. Buenos Aires has done better. Santa Fe's done better. And the farther north you go along the Parna River, I mean, we've got some places that are flooding right now.
Hmm.
So Argentina has some spots that are still in trouble. They're farther west overall, but it's going to be better than last year. That's for sure in Argentina.
Okay, all right. Any other features you're watching around the world, Eric, that we need to keep a close eye on the weather front?
Yeah, Europe, it's pretty amazing. They built up a pretty massive reserve of, of fuels, be it for heating, right? And therefore, this big cold snap that came through didn't drive the markets in a direction you may have thought it would. But they just added up about, I don't know, a meter of snow, 3 feet of snow in the Alps, big snows in parts of Russia. Remember back about, what was it, a week ago, big storm system hit Ukraine and Russia. So Europe, if they continue on this colder, snowier winter, then at some point we're going to start to exhaust these reserves, and we could get a big shift in energy prices at some point just because of the conflict that surrounds that area. And then I would also say Australia just enjoyed about 2 weeks of very heavy rainfall that they desperately needed. They don't often get that in an El Nino. We got to watch Australia pretty closely too.
Okay. Great stuff as always. I know if folks want to stay up to date with the latest weather information for their hometown or more, just go to ag-wx.com, ag-wx.com. With that, Eric Snodgrass from Nutrient Ag Solutions. Always good to talk with you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Yep, sounds good.